The prison moon of Verek. 7 hung ominously in the void, its massive fortresses casting long shadows over the barren landscape. A colossal gas giant loomed in the distance, swirling storms of red and orange illuminating the darkened corridors of the maximum security facility. Inside, Warden Corleth, a towering reptilian being with jagged scars across his thick-scaled hide, strode through the cold, sterile halls, his heavy footsteps echoing against the reinforced metal floors. Beside him walked Inspector Relith, a slender avian alien from the Galactic Bureau of Justice, his feathers bristling with barely concealed apprehension. His sharp, beady eyes darted around, scanning the facility with an air of skepticism. They moved past towering containment cells reinforced with layered energy shielding and containment fields strong enough to hold warlords, assassins, and genetically enhanced berserkers. The air was thick with an underlying tension, the kind that never truly left places like this. "Warden Corleth," Relith said, his voice clipped and wary. "I must admit, I expected to see far more, precautions in place. Considering the nature of your inmates, the lack of automated turrets, suppression fields, and drone enforcers is surprising." Corleth let out a deep, rumbling chuckle, the sound like distant thunder rolling through the halls. "You misunderstand, Inspector. We have all the security we need. The measures you mention are unnecessary here." Relith's feathers ruffled in irritation. "Unnecessary? You house the most dangerous criminals in the known galaxy. Some of these beings have overthrown governments. Entire fleets have failed to subdue them, yet you claim." The inspector's voice trailed off as they turned a corner, stepping into the primary holding area. What he saw made him pause mid-stride. Lining the corridors, stationed at every checkpoint and guarding every major access point, were humans. No advanced battle drones. No towering warbeasts outfitted with neural suppression gear. Just humans. Unlike the standard galactic enforcers clad in thick, armored plating, the human guards wore minimal protection. Simple uniforms, reinforced boots, and utility belts with only the most basic of non-lethal equipment. No plasma rifles. No shock batons. No heavy artillery. And yet, they moved through the facility with an air of complete confidence, their casual yet watchful demeanor completely at odds with the violent history of the prisoners they kept in check. Relith's confusion deepened as he observed a particularly unsettling sight. A Icarian warlord, an 8-foot-tall brute with 4 arms and thick chitinous plating, stood rigid in his containment cell as a human guard leaned lazily against the control panel outside. The warlord was a terror in the galactic underworld, known for crushing skulls with his bare hands and ripping apart military strike teams with ease. But here he barely moved. The human on duty looked completely unfazed, chewing on a piece of some Terran snack, his expression bored. At one point, he raised an eyebrow and tilted his head slightly toward the warlord. "Something you want to say?" he asked, voice calm, almost amused. The warlord's mandibles twitched, but he averted his gaze, stepping back without a word. Relith blinked, his avian mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. He turned to Corleth. "That was the Icarian warlord. I read his file. He once tore through an entire legion of enforcers. And yet," Corleth interrupted, smirking, "he refuses to challenge that guard." The inspector narrowed his eyes. "Why?" Corleth gestured for him to follow, leading him further down the hall, passing more cells. The scene repeated itself over and over. Prisoners who had previously toppled civilizations, who had bested elite strike teams, all showing the same unnerving hesitancy in the presence of their human captors. Some prisoners barely moved, their eyes locked onto their guards with a quiet, reluctant respect. Others actively flinched when a human so much as adjusted their stance. "You see, Inspector," Corleth continued, "we used to try standard methods. Force fields, energy suppression, battle drones. But Deathworlders, those raised in the most violent environments in the galaxy, always found ways to resist, to fight back. We lost too many good officers, and the cost of maintaining security was rising by the cycle." He stopped before a large observation window overlooking the central yard, where a group of human guards stood monitoring the inmates. Some were exchanging casual banter, laughing amongst themselves. Others simply leaned against the walls, arms crossed, surveying the prisoners with quiet amusement. The prisoners, however, remained tense. "Then we tried humans," Corleth continued. "And suddenly, the riot stopped. The escape attempts dropped to 0. The prisoners became compliant." Relith turned to face him. "But why? What makes them different?" Corleth chuckled, his massive arms folding across his broad chest. "Because, Inspector, Humans are Deathworlders too. And unlike the rest of us, they don't just survive violence. He nodded toward the guards. They enjoy it. Relith felt a chill run down his spine as he looked once more at the humans. Their relaxed postures, their easy smiles, it wasn't arrogance. It was certainty. The certainty of creatures who had spent millennia fighting and conquering their own brutal world, who had turned war into an art form, and who now walked among the galaxy's most feared criminals with the quiet, terrifying knowledge that there was nothing here that could surprise them.
The alarms blared through the reinforced corridors of War AK-7, a deep, echoing sound that sent a wave of unease through the facility. The inspector's feathers bristled as he followed Warden toward the command center, his mind racing with the possibilities. Had one of the prisoners attempted an escape? A riot? With inmates as dangerous as these, any disturbance could escalate into a catastrophe. As they entered the command center, a massive, flickered with red warning lights, showing a cluster of containment cells deep in the lower levels. Report barked, his deep voice cutting through the noise like a blade. One of the human officers at the console, a woman with sharp eyes and an air of complete control, barely glanced up as she responded. Sector 5. Prisoner uprising. They're testing the containment fields. Tensed, his talons flexing against the cold metal floor. Testing. The officer shrugged. Yeah, testing. She tapped a few controls, pulling up security feeds. The screens flickered to life, showing grainy footage of a group of prisoners, massive creatures with heavy plating, claws, and frames, piecing within their cells. They pressed against the containment fields, analyzing the fluctuations, gauging the response times of the automated security measures. These weren't simple criminals. They were warlords, assassins, and genetically enhanced berserkers, all calculating, all waiting for an opening. Sighed, rubbing a clawed hand down his snout. They do this every so often. They think they're smarter than the system. Feathers ruffled. And they might be. Those containment fields won't hold if they time the pulses correctly. You need to increase power output, deploy suppressor drones. Relax, the human officer cut in, finally turning to him with a smirk. We've got this. Turned to, baffled. You're not mobilizing additional forces. Merely gestured to the screens. Just watch. The security feeds showed the prisoners in one particular cell finally making their move. A massive brute, covered in thick natural armor, slammed his weight against the field just as it flickered. The pulse rebounded, but it was weaker than before. Another followed, this one a towering warlord, his scarred exoskeleton a testament to the battles he had survived. The field wavered. Another strike. Another. Then, with a sharp hiss, the containment field collapsed. Breath caught in his throat. The prisoners stood still for a brief moment, almost as if they couldn't believe their own success. Then, grinning with triumph, they moved. They rushed the exit, ready to tear through whatever stood in their way. The hallway outside was empty. No turrets activated. No automated defenses kicked in. The only thing standing between them and freedom was a single figure. A human. The prisoners hesitated just slightly, as if their minds were struggling to reconcile the absurdity of the situation. A lone, unarmored human, standing with his hands tucked into his pockets, his stance casual. The overhead lights flickered slightly, the shadows stretching around him as he finally moved. He took a step forward, rolling his shoulders as if loosening up before a fight. Stared, his mind screaming at the sheer insanity of it. He's alone. He doesn't even have a weapon. Only smiled. He doesn't need one. The largest of the group, took the lead, charging forward with an roar. His claws extended, ready to tear flesh from bone. The human exhaled. Then he moved. It happened so fast that almost missed it. 1 second, the was lunging. The next, the human had sidestepped with eerie precision, barely shifting his weight before his fist lashed out. A single punch. The dropped instantly, collapsing to the floor with a sickening crunch. And moving. The rest of the prisoners froze. The human straightened, flexing his fingers. Who's next? Silence. The warlord, known for gutting entire squads in combat, took an uneasy step backward. The others exchanged uncertain glances. They had fought soldiers, mercenaries, even genetically modified warriors. But humans? Humans didn't fight like this. They didn't need weapons. They were the weapons. The human sighed, tilting his head. Come on, you were real eager a second ago. Nobody moved. Then, slowly, van by van, the prisoners raised their hands in surrender. The human cracked his neck. Thought so. He reached for his calm device, tapping it lazily. Sector 5 secure. Send cleanup. The feed cut out. Stood there, unable to speak, unable to process what he had just witnessed. The prisoners, some of the most dangerous beings in the known galaxy, had been stopped by one man. No armor, no weapons, just raw, terrifying efficiency. You see, said, his voice filled with amusement, when most species fight, they rely on brute strength, numbers, or superior firepower. Humans? They learned a long time ago that the most dangerous thing in a fight isn't the biggest or the strongest. Swallowed. Then what is? Smile widened. The one who enjoys it the most. The inspector turned back to the remaining screens, watching as the human casually leaned against the wall, waiting for reinforcements like he had just finished a routine task. For the first time since arriving, truly understood. This prison wasn't secured by technology.
The thick scent of ozone and sterilized metal filled the air in the high-security wing of Varric 7. Inspector Relith's talons clicked against the reinforced floors as he followed Warden Corlith deeper into the prison, his mind still reeling from what he had witnessed earlier. The prisoners had surrendered, not because they were outmatched in numbers or strength, but because of one human. One unarmed human who had taken down the largest of them with a single blow. It was absurd. It was impossible. And yet it had happened. Tell me, Relith said, his voice lower than before. These humans you hire, are they all like that? Corlith let out a gravelly chuckle. Like Officer Briggs? No. Some are worse. Relith's feathers bristled. Worse. You'll see soon enough, Corlith said, gesturing toward a reinforced blast door at the end of the hall. A red warning light pulsed above it, marking it as a level 10 containment zone, the highest security classification. We had an incident here last week. The inspector's mandibles clicked in irritation. Another prisoner escape attempt? Corlith shook his head. No, the opposite. He keyed in a sequence on the control panel, and the heavy doors hissed open, revealing a dimly lit observation deck overlooking a massive reinforced cell. Inside, the walls were lined with gravity stabilizers, energy dampeners, and even psychic inhibitors. Every conceivable precaution taken to ensure that whatever was locked in there stayed locked. Relith stepped forward and peered through the reinforced glass. What he saw sent a chill through him. A single inmate sat on the floor, restrained by massive alloy shackles that pulsed with containment energy. It was a Yelkar warlord, an apex predator among its kind, known for tearing apart armored soldiers with ease. Its 4 powerful arms were bound, its mandibles twitching in subdued rage. But what disturbed Relith the most was the damage. The creature's exoskeleton was cracked, bruised flesh visible beneath the plates. One of its secondary arms hung limp, clearly broken. This being was a monster, a terror across dozens of systems. And yet it looked beaten. What happened? Relith asked. Corlith exhaled. Warlord Yorick there made a mistake. He assumed that just because we didn't keep energy rifles trained on him 24 hours a day, he could get away with something. On the other side of the glass, a side door to the containment area slid open, and a single guard entered. Relith's eyes widened in disbelief. It was another human. This one was different from the first officer he had seen. Where Briggs had been casual, almost lazy in his movements, this one carried himself with a slow, deliberate presence. His uniform bore additional commendations, his frame slightly heavier with muscle. But it was his expression that made Relith's feathers stand on end. There was no fear, no caution, just a slow, calculating gaze as he stepped toward the bound warlord. The Yelkar warlord's mandibles spread in a twisted grin. Come to mock me, human? Its voice was deep, guttural, filled with restrained fury. Or perhaps you think you can break me further? The human said nothing at first. He simply crouched down to eye level, watching the prisoner with an unsettling intensity. Then finally he spoke. "No," he said. "I'm just here to remind you." The warlord let out a chittering laugh. "Remind me of what?" The human leaned in slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "That I let you live." Relith shuddered at the way the Yelkar's demeanor changed. The laughter cut off instantly. Its body tensed, mandibles twitching, eyes narrowing. For a moment there was silence. Then the prisoner exhaled slowly, its limbs slumping, its gaze dropping. Submission. Relith turned sharply to Corlith. What did he mean? Corlith smiled grimly. Exactly what it sounded like. He gestured back to the prisoner. Yorick there thought he could take control of this facility. He picked a fight with Officer Duval. Didn't go the way he planned. Relith turned back to the scene below. The warlord wasn't moving anymore. The arrogance was gone, replaced with a strange, simmering fear. The human, Duval, stood up, adjusting his gloves. "Keep behaving," he said simply. Then he turned and walked out without another word. The heavy door sealed shut behind him, and the warlord still did not move. Relith exhaled, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. "This isn't normal," he finally said. "This shouldn't be normal." Corlith crossed his arms. "And yet it is." Relith shook his head. "I don't understand. I've seen elite enforcers, cybernetic warriors, telekinetic battle minds. Nothing has had this effect on hardened criminals. Why humans? Why only humans?" Corlith's smile didn't fade. Instead, he leaned in slightly, his tone almost conspiratorial. "Because criminals, killers, warlords, they all have one thing in common. They thrive in chaos. They've spent their lives being the apex predator in the room, knowing that everyone else fears them." He glanced back at the prisoner, still motionless. But when they fight humans, something changes. They see something worse. Something that doesn't fear them. Something that enjoys the fight. Relith swallowed hard, his talons flexing against the cold railing. The realization hit him like a plasma bolt. The prisoners weren't afraid of the weapons. They weren't afraid of the security systems. They were afraid of the guards. And for the first time since arriving at Varric 7, Relith found himself wondering if the prisoners were the only ones who should be.
The emergency sirens blared across Varric 7 as thick security doors slammed shut, locking down every corridor in the facility. Crimson warning lights pulsed along the walls, and the automated defense turrets whirred into position, tracking movement in every direction. The prison had been breached. Not from the outside, but from within. Warden Corlith stood on the command deck, his eyes darting between the dozens of hollow feeds displaying the chaos unfolding below. Prisoners were loose. Entire cell blocks had fallen into anarchy. Even the reinforced containment wings were struggling to hold. The air crackled with tension as a security officer ran up to him, scales slick with stress. "Sir, multiple Level 9 prisoners are unaccounted for. We've lost contact with 3 security teams." Corlith cut him off. "Where are the humans?" The officer hesitated, then gestured to the main feed on the central screen. Corlith turned his gaze just as the camera switched views. And there he was. Officer Briggs, standing alone in the middle of a prison corridor, casually rolling his shoulders as a wave of escaped prisoners stormed toward him. They were an assortment of horrors: massive reptilian bruisers, cybernetic-enhanced marauders, creatures with claws that could rend durasteel like paper. The kind of beings that entire squads were deployed to contain. Briggs didn't even draw a weapon. Corlith gripped the edge of the console as the scene unfolded. The first attacker, a hulking draconair twice the human size, swung a serrated blade the length of a small hovercar. Briggs ducked under the arc with inhuman speed, closing the distance in a heartbeat. His fist snapped forward, connecting with the draconair's gut. The impact was horrifying. A sickening crunch echoed through the corridor as the brute's massive frame folded inward, lifted off the ground, and hurled backward into 3 more prisoners with the force of a plasma detonation. The others hesitated, suddenly unsure. Briggs smiled. Then he moved. The next few seconds were a blur. Corlith could barely track what he was seeing. Briggs weaved through the incoming attacks like a specter, his movements impossibly fluid, precise, and devastating. He grabbed a cyborg's mechanical arm mid-strike and twisted. It shattered like brittle glass. A multi-limbed warbeast lunged at him, only for Briggs to sidestep, grab one of its appendages, and use its own momentum to slam it headfirst into the reinforced floor. Another prisoner charged with a plasma baton, only to receive a boot to the chest that sent him crashing into the ceiling before crumpling into unconsciousness. It wasn't a fight. It was a message. The prisoners realized it at the same time. The assault faltered. One tried to turn and run, but Briggs was already there, gripping the back of his neck and slamming him into the ground. The others stumbled backward, some dropping their makeshift weapons. Then Briggs spoke, his voice carrying over the chaos like a judge passing sentence. "You had your chance." The remaining prisoners surrendered. Not out of strategy. Not because they were outnumbered. But because, for the first time in their lives, they had encountered something worse than themselves. Corlith exhaled, barely realizing he had been holding his breath. He turned to the officer beside him. "What's the situation in the other sectors?" The officer switched feeds, bringing up a new section of the prison. This time, it was Officer Duval. The scene was different but carried the same terrifying inevitability. A towering Narlik warlord had cornered 3 security officers, his tusks glistening with fresh blood. Before he could finish his next charge, Duval intercepted him with a brutal bone-cracking impact, sending the warlord's massive frame skidding across the floor. In another wing, Officer Lee was clearing out an entire cell block with nothing but his bare hands and an expression of complete boredom. He caught a plasma bolt mid-air with an energy-dampening glove, tossing it back toward its source like a casual afterthought. The resulting explosion sent inmates scattering. The officer beside Corlith swallowed hard. "Sir, I think we should stand down." Corlith turned toward him. "Explain." The officer gestured toward the screens. "We deployed all our resources, automated defenses, enforcer units, lockdown measures, and nothing was stopping them. But the humans..." He hesitated. "They aren't just stopping it. They're ending it." Corlith looked back at the displays. It was true. The riot was over. Not because of overwhelming firepower. Not because of advanced technology. But because a handful of humans had walked into the fray without hesitation, without backup, and had broken the morale of creatures who had never known fear. Corlith exhaled. "Tell all remaining officers to hold their positions. Let the humans finish it." The officer hesitated for a moment before nodding and relaying the command. Minutes passed. The feeds continued to update, showing more prisoners surrendering, some throwing themselves into empty cells just to escape what they had faced. Finally, the emergency sirens died down, the red lights shifting to a calmer yellow. The crisis was over. And the only casualties were those foolish enough to test the limits of human brutality. A soft chuckle escaped Corlith's lips. Relith, the inspector who had visited earlier, had asked why Deathworlder prisons only hired human guards.